Hey guys, this is the Monte and Wolf Show. We're actually recording this after we recorded most of this show. I'm not in my normal location. I'm in California right now instead of in Korea with Wolf. So that we had some video encoding issues. So the audio is going to be fine. The video is going to be a little bit scuffed for a lot of it. But if you wait till the end when we do our actual Worlds team previews, everything should have been solved by then. We're re-recording that section. So thanks a lot for bearing with us, and we'll see you on the other side. Welcome back to the Monte and Wolf Show. This is our final show of the year because the LCK is over. Finals are over. The gauntlet is over. Sorry, guys, that we didn't actually have a show last week. We were a little bogged down because, as it turns out, I was traveling to California for a little bit, as you can see with the lovely background behind me, and Wolf was very, very busy with the traveling for the LCK finals. So it was a bit rough to get it in right after finals.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys, but we're here now. We got a lot to talk about. Some things that I'm not super stoked to talk about today with our teams that qualified for Worlds. But yeah, it's been a
Why aren't you
crazy
super
week.
stoked to talk about them? What's wrong? Is T1 not the team that you dreamed would be at the World Championship of League of Legends?
I don't mind what team goes, but I feel like there were some questionable performances out of our qualifying teams, and I think there's still quite a gap between GenG and HLE and the rest of the teams that are going.
Yeah. Was a bit of a clown fiesta there, T1 and Dplus Kia, gotta say. We'll get into that, though. First off, let's talk about the finals, which turned out to be a really shocking upset that only Ox called for Hanwha Life. They are now the first seed coming in from Korea. Probably one of the biggest upsets we've seen in a long time, even though, Hanwha had performed extremely well over the playoffs. We had seen Peanut really turn in a lot of very, very good performances all the way through the finals. So what were your main takeaways from the finals, Wolf?
I mean, the thing about Ox's prediction was, he kind of memed it a little bit. Like we're all gonna be honest here, right? Like he was like, I don't know, I think they're due was kind of the quote that he used. I think it's time. But I think within all of the talent team, we were all like, well, we have to predict a one-sided finals, 3-1 at worst case scenario. But everyone did kind of feel like there was a real chance that Hanwha could win, like they could just outplay on the day. And it kind of reminded me of the Pro League finals I cast in 2014, where it was SK Telecom against KT Rolster. And
I was there for that one. I was there for that one.
Everybody thought SK Telecom is just gonna smash, like they're the better team. But there was like this overarching feeling amongst everyone that maybe KT would actually win. And very few people predicted them to, but then they did, and this was a similar vibe I had. And the closer and closer we got to casting the match, I was like, I don't know, like maybe Hanwha wins, because we were talking about narrative points about what happens if GenG wins, because they've won it so many times in a row, right? And like the storylines around that, and it was kind of tiring to discuss it again and again and again, right? But we were like, we need to kind of have a vibe ready for what happens if Hanwha win, and everyone's like, but will they though? I'm like, I don't know. Don't you think that maybe there's a chance? And then obviously the series happened in game one. Hanwha were kind of winning, right? And then GenG came back with their scaling comp with the Smolder, and then I feel like in game one there was the vibe between all of us was kind of like, oh, maybe Hanwha is gonna win, and they're like, oh no, we knew GenG was better. But then and then like the GenG messed up the last team fight, and Zeka clutched it out with Viper. And they won that first game, and they just pushed directly to end. There was no hesitation. And at that moment, I was like, well, the series is going to be interesting, right? But I wasn't convinced that Hanwha could actually win the series off of some clutch plays like that. But they just had a really good read, and some of the GenG players underperformed. I think Chovy really underperformed in this series. The Corki pick obviously has fallen down quite a bit in terms of its success right now. And there were some really good drafts for the side of Hanwha Life. And Viper played very good Ziggs, which was something we had questions about going into the series, but he was able to pull it off. So I was just overall impressed. I think Zeka has improved as a player so much. We've talked about him on this show so many times as being, basically melee only. He can only play 2 or 3 champions. He was a Patrick, and it was true back then. Like, it was absolutely true. But now, he's really expanded. And yes, he could still play the Yone at an incredible level, but his Tristana has been very good. His Corki's been very good. He's improved on picks like the Talia and the Azir, which aren't as relevant right now, but you could definitely feel that improvement throughout especially the whole year, this year. It was the easiest MVP vote of my life to put that in the mid box and check it and send it in. I really just thought it was such a Zeka series, such incredible growth for him. And I know the whole storyline was about Peanut and him finally getting another title, and he's getting older and he's going to be retiring at some point. But and that's cool. Like he's the last Rocks Tiger. Like Hanwha Life acquired the Rocks Tigers roster like so long ago. So like there was some cool storylines there. But for me, it was all about Zeka and, Delight having a great series too. They just were the better team on the day, and only slightly, by the way. Like, I mean, it was a close series, but they were the better team on the day, which I just didn't think we were ever going to be able to say.
Yeah, and look, I think when it comes to Hanwha Life, they really had a better meta read as well. Like by the end of the series, obviously, what was crazy, Wolf, about this series is that this was almost a 3-0. If we don't actually see Pays kind of like throwing that first game and Viper and Zeka catching that throw and having some really amazing plays, like this series is just a 3-0 and that's it. And we go home and we don't actually get to see the rest of it. So that game one turned out to be really crucial. And then Hanwha winning the last two games of the series, like GenG, it feels to me, Wolf, kind of got lost in the sauce. And one of the most insane things to me about this was that, so if we rewind, remember, Wolf, the last match of the regular split in summer was between these two teams. Did it mean anything? No. They were already locked into first and second seed. But what happened in those games? Chovy picks Tristana, and he absolutely pops off against them to the degree that when they meet in the upper bracket finals, Hanwha Life bans Tristana every single game against them.
Yeah.
And then when it comes into this series, they just don't care. They're not picking Tristana when it's up. They are letting it fall into GenG's hands. Or they are, they're just passing through draft entirely, right? And I was just really surprised that GenG would ban it in the last game instead of B1 picking it. And I'm really surprised that in game 4, they just let it pass through their first rotation of the draft and said, here you go, Zeka, you can have this. Because what was so scary about Chovy is that he would get in that Tristana in the side lane. He would do Chovy things. He would get incredibly fed. And then he was amazing in terms of his team fight presence in the regular season on Tristana. He'd be flashing forward to get jump resets and cleaning up all these team fights. Hanwha was so scared of it, they banned it in every single game. And then they just don't take it when it's available. It is wild to me that this happened.
Yeah, and like, I think obviously there's a huge difference between what a Tristana can do in a side lane and what a Corki can do. Like, we've been talking about this all season, like since since summer started, about how like Tristana can side lane. She's incredibly oppressive in lane, but also incredibly safe in lane. She can solo a dragon while you're contesting Baron Vision because she has that high damage output that she can just solo a dragon safely, by the way, because she has an escape. So if you do try to come over and punish her, she just gets out and doesn't care. Corki is not able to do a lot of those things.
Right.
And obviously his health was nerfed and stuff like that. I think the difference too is that, with Corki, you're relatively safe because you have Valkyrie, right? Like that's a very strong ability and is part of why Corki is still relevant and still very strong because it gives you the ability to escape. You still have insane high damage output, right? But Tristana has the ability to do that, but then get a reset and then go back in. She can also cleanse CC with it. Like it's, the difference between these two picks has always felt quite large. And the one thing that Corki has that Tristana doesn't have is like some poke, right? Like the Q, the ultimate, like you can poke, you can offer some damage without kind of going all into the fight. That Tristana can't, especially until she gets her range in later levels. And I think that this is really felt by watching like Zeka play against Chovy in that fourth game and the agency that Zeka had that Chovy did not have. And so many teams are still prioritizing the Corki, and we even saw it in regional qualifiers, and then it went on that insane long losing streak. And I do feel like Corki is kind of one-dimensional right now and very figured out as just a bland 80 carry, but Tristana does so much more. And despite her nerfs, I mean, there were small nerfs, really, just some mana stuff. Despite the nerfs, it really still feels like it's top dog in terms of mid picks, in terms of any 80 pick that you would want. And so that priority going by the wayside, giving that over to Zeka, not taking it when it was available, felt very bizarre by GenG in the series. And then Chovy just didn't look Like he was having a great time. And Pays, I think, was the least performing player on GenG. I think he made a lot of mistakes. You mentioned the game one mistake. He just didn't look comfortable. But Chovy didn't rise to the occasion. No, I don't want to say Chovy played very badly or anything.
How about your guy Pays? Did he rise to the occasion, Wolf? Did Pays rise to the occasion?
No, I mean Pays did not. You know, he didn't. He had a rough series. He looked nervous for like the first time I've ever really seen in a best of 5 for him.
How's your Pays today, Wolf?
I mean, look, I judge Pays based on his current form at each iteration when we talk about this. And right now, I'll judge him harshly because I think he's part of the reason why they lost the series. And like you said, it could have otherwise been a 3-0. But he didn't have great performances on the Kai'Sa. I think Kai'Sa is a fake counter to Ziggs, by the way. Everyone's always like, oh yeah, Kai'Sa's the counter to Ziggs. What's he gonna do if she gets on top of her? That's not how League of Legends is played anymore. Kai'Sa never gets on top of the Ziggs. That never happens. Like, don't pick this. That's not the answer. The Jhin is a much better answer.
So first off, I do think the Kai'Sa can be okay, but you actually have to have champions that dive with it. You can't be playing like Corki Cassante with, you know what I mean? You have to be able to go all in. Like Skarner can sort of dive, but he can dive the first person that he hits with his E, you know what I mean? But GenG also just completely fumbled that last game in terms of execution. Why is Canyon like trying to flank them when Chovy's playing Corki, and Chovy's actually doing fine, by the way, in this game. He's actually getting super farmed up. But the problem is that basically the combo of Vi ults, Ziggs ults, Yone ults, and Doran on Jax basically means that they press R and somebody dies. And that pressing R is on Chovy, and he dies, which means Pays has to carry the rest of this team fight, and instead he's Kai'Sa ulting into the back line and then just getting hit by a minefield and dying. You know what I mean? There's no support. And so if we know they're going to dive, if we know we're facing a dive composition, why isn't Canyon waiting to catch the dive? Why is he trying to like flank out a Baron pit? It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, consider that basically the comp of Hanwha Life both has better dive for single target and better combos. Like they can set up a big counter strike with the Rel. They have the Ziggs bomb. They have Zeka's ult. Like they can do both single target and also just team wipe like wombo combo stuff. They don't have consistent damage output. Like they don't have a ranged 80 carry. They don't have that. But neither did GenG because they went for Kai'Sa. So it's not like, I mean, sure, they have Chovy, but that's only one threat. And it's too dangerous to play that style into a comp that can just lock you down with Vi ultimate. Like your Valkyrie is not going to save you if you're out of position. If you're in range of the Vi ultimate, then you're screwed. And if you're not, then you're probably not doing that much damage. Right. And you have a Kai'Sa who's like waiting to go in, but there's no one to set up for her. So the comp just didn't really work for GenG in that final game.
And the whole thing was just disappointing. Like the lack of priority on the Tristana, which is just a Chovy champ that they've been using to create pressure to super farm Chovy, get him that tier 2 side turret local gold. And then we just get this Corki pick. And like, why is the Corki the priority here? And what, are we concerned about, why aren't we playing the Jhin if we're going to let them have the Zig? It's not like we hadn't seen that. Like basically Hanwha was playing that the entire series versus T1. The entire game was basically just like Jhin Ziggs bot lane. Like the entire series.
And we know that Pays is a good Jhin player. Like he played it a ton this season. So it's not even like a champion pool issue. Maybe it's a lack of like maybe they didn't prep it and maybe they were thinking they had a different answer, but I clearly didn't see it. Whereas Hanwha were insanely prepped against T1, willing to give Guma, who's one of the worst Ziggs, right? Like in Gyeongju, he was the worst Ziggs, right? And then they're willing to give it to him, and then like we have an answer. And GenG, or rather, T1 didn't have the like response. They were like, oh, this Jhin pick's kind of a problem. They eventually started to figure it out, but it was too late in that series. And then we move into the next series, and Hanwha just completely pivots. They're not like, oh well, FaZe is bad at Ziggs, we'll just give it over for free and play Jhin. Like they've pivoted, but when GenG give the Ziggs over, their answer is the Kai'Sa, and it just didn't work, So I felt like in terms of preparation, GenG didn't do that much. Like they didn't show us any cool new strats. Like we saw last season, like Chovy pulling out the Aurelion Soul. There were a lot of cool ideas coming through from GenG. We saw the Kha'Zix, right? Like there were moments where you're like, okay, well this series has some depth. There's some real awesome preparation going into this. I just felt like GenG walked into this being like, we're way better than them. Let's just play our best game. And Hanwha played better on the day, and they had some good reads in draft.
Well, especially Zeka and Viper and Peanut, who are absolutely amazing this series. I mean, this is Viper's performance was absolutely outstanding. Zeka gets a very well-deserved MVP, as you stated earlier. Peanut, is probably, he wasn't necessarily the MVP of the finals, but he was MVP of these playoffs, if we're being honest, because a lot of the play that we saw against T1 was him shutting Owner down entirely. He comprehensively out-jungled Owner in that series. So really just amazing in performance from Hanwha Life. And this is great because heading into Worlds, it feels like we have two really strong teams coming from Korea. And I think mostly for GenG, it felt more like a preparation issue, as you say, and like a cockiness issue, rather than them not having the tools, which we know they have because they could have focused on the Tristana. They could have prioritized it. And indeed, the first 3 games of this series were pretty dominant displays despite them losing game number 1. That's a minor error away from being a win. And the next 2 games were pretty much stomps by GenG. They were not close matches.
Yeah, no. And I think GenG will probably spend some time off and then start grinding the new patch before Worlds. Obviously, there's a lot of time. Like, Worlds is starting soon, but it's play-ins, and GenG doesn't have to do that.
Yeah, none of the Korean teams are in play-ins, guys.
Yeah.
Concerned about that. So they won't actually start till October.
That's one of the best parts of the new Worlds format is that we don't actually have to have, like, the Korean dumpstering of weekly teams.
But we'll never get the DRX play-ins run to World Champion again, Wolf. Like, that probably is just never going to happen any longer. Now that, China and Korea 4th seeds are not in play-ins anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the gap, though, feels like it's... I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the gap seems like it's widening, so you get a different version of it in Swiss anyways, But yeah, I thought that the venue, by the way, and, like, Gyeongju in general, because we usually talk about, like, opening ceremony and stuff like that on the show, too. The opening ceremony was pretty cool. It wasn't as grandiose as some of the other ones we've had.
It was still very good, but it wasn't as epic as the spring one. But I mean, they also weren't. Yeah. They weren't in Seoul for that, so it's harder for them to probably plan. They can do it in a more epic fashion if it's close by.
And the venue was
really
quite
cool,
small. And so like they did there's a really old bridge that's very famous in Gyeongju, and
you saw it in the hype opening, guys. They were like,
So they had like the bridge, that's in the opening, which is super famous. But then like the stage is kind of just designed to mirror that, and it felt like in a lot of ways this finals was the opening was to kind of make it city based, and like we're in Gyeongju, and like this is a road show, which is obviously very important and very topical. Moving into like next year, we don't know what the future is going to be of road shows and stuff like that. But I thought it was cool. I like that they continued the flag theme for GenG, and they had the part of the opening ceremony where they were wearing the capes and stuff, and they threw them off and then walked out. And I thought it was very well done. I thought they made GenG look very elite, the big bad. Almost made them look like antagonists in this case, which I thought was a cool storyline considering, Hanwha Life has Peanut, and, they haven't won in a really long time. It's been a really long time since they've been to a finals. And GenG is like back to back to back to back. So... can they topple this elite team? I really did enjoy that. I thought that, they used the little small handheld, like, I don't want to call them glow sticks, but I'm talking about little orbs.
The LED
again,
orbs.
With team colors. Yeah, which a lot of K-pop concerts and stuff use, but I thought that was really cool in spring, and I thought it was very successful, and I like that they used that again. It has a different aura to it than, like, the big, like, boomsticks that are neon and stuff that we often see. That OGN was more famous for.
It worked really well this time because they also had like the constellation theme with the augmented reality, so it did look like a sea of stars.
Yeah, because the one of the most famous parts of Gyeongju is the observatory, which if you guys watch the desk and they had like the thing that looks like a chimney on the desk, it's like Asia's oldest observatory. It's in Gyeongju, so like that's why the star theme was there. I think they really try to keep it like super city focused. And some of the stuff we've done, obviously, because we get a lot of support from the city when we do these big events, so we get to travel, which is awesome. Some of the stuff that we've done for the LCK is a little bit less tasteful, a little bit less cool when it's city-based. Like, it was a little bit more like #ad. This felt like very cool to me, especially because we have all these star players, right? And constellations were really cool. And I really enjoyed the event itself. The Fan Fest is where we ended up doing the desk because the venue size, like I said, was somewhat limited. But it was cool to be able to see fans who didn't have tickets come in. A lot of Korean fans came and talked to me. I didn't laugh at anybody. A lot of Korean fans came and talked to me though, and said that they saw our show and they actually were glad that it's getting translated. And I interacted with a lot of people that like were going like, I'm looking forward to the episode about this finals, you know, and it was cool.
That's great.
I was surprised.
Shout out to the
to see
Korean
that.
fans, the normal ones.
Yeah, no, it was really nice. Like it was cool.
Hey
A lot of
guys,
T1 fans were
hey
really
T1 fans, how's Faker's Yone now? How's it now? How's it looking now? Tell me.
I mean, he did play one good, decent-ish game of it, and then he gave it to Zeus, and then they won the world. Like when I saw that Yoni lock in Game 5 yesterday, I was like, "Nah, that's for Zeus," and it was.
It was great,
and everything was right with the world again. Yeah, it was a fun finals. It was fun to travel there. I will say the city was very. I've never been to Yeongju before. It was very sparse in terms of a lot of things to do. It was not a very populated city compared to like the other cities I've been to in Korea. There was a very naturey vibe. It was very
yeah. It seems
calm,
like there's
like
a lot of historical buildings there, though.
Yeah, it feels like a place you'd want to go if you want to unplug a little bit. So I might go back. Yeah, when
I want
need
to check
that.
it out now. It sold me, Wolf, that the advertising's working. I had never even heard of it before. Now I want to go see the bridge. Maybe I'll
There
do
you
that.
go.
Or maybe we'll go together. Anyway, guys, that'll wrap up our talk on the final here. We'll get back to some of these teams when we do some Worlds preview stuff in a little bit. But I want to move on to the regionals. But first, before we do that, what guys? New sponsor this week, Blam, Turtle Beach. Oh yeah. You've been looking for a new gaming headset? This is what you want to get. You probably understand they've been known for their quality of gaming headsets for a long time. You can get them at a variety of different price points, but if you really want to lock in, you might pick up the Gen 3 Stealth 600 headset. Although Gen G is also sponsored by Turtle. The synergy is there, the Gen 3 and the Gen G. But basically, a lot of these headsets are optimized to actually work very well with games. So you can hear footsteps more clearly, hear the sound effects more clearly. So they've been equalized in a way and designed in a way to give you these advantages when you're actually gaming. You might also check out, they just released a new headset called the Atlas Air, which is an open back headset that's really quite comfortable. That's been getting a lot of great reviews out there if you go and look at it. So not only that, Wolf, but I don't know if you know this. Did you know that they bought Rockcat, the keyboard and mouse manufacturer? Yeah. So not only do they do headsets, guys, but they also do keyboard and mice. And actually, the old like the Rockcat cone, which they still make, the Turtle Beach cone as it is now, has always been one of my favorite mice. So I'm really psyched to be sponsored by Turtle Beach. Yeah, and also, you know, the new Stealth 600. It has an 80-hour battery life with quick charge, so you really have to think about charging it. They will hook up, you know, to your computer. They have cross compatibility with PlayStation and Xbox via Bluetooth, so very useful for both things. Mics are also attached. Some of the mics are removable depending on the headset that you get, so you guys can check it out. But you can get the ultimate immersive gaming experience with Turtle Beach today for a limited time only. Head to turtlebeach.com and use code Monte Wolf, name of our show, for 10% off your entire order. So it could be headsets, could be that new keyboard you've been wanting, could be a new mouse. That's 10% off your order at turtlebeach.com with promo code. Thank you very much, Turtle Beach.
Yeah, thanks so much. And they have a lot of products, both, you know, Rockcat, you mentioned that they acquired, and then Turtle Beach have been sponsoring and supporting esports for a really, really long time. So if you want to get something that actually makes you feel like you're supporting us, supporting a lot of esports events around the world, obviously you mentioned sponsoring GenG as well, then check them out because they have a lot of products that are really good. And what I love about their headsets, if I'm totally honest, is a lot of gaming headsets in the space right now are super cringe. Like, they look very gamer. And if you're trying to, you know, look a little bit mature on your stream or the content you're creating, or you're just playing with your friends, I feel like the Turtle Beach headsets are very clean. You know, they look really nice. And
Yeah.
they don't make me feel like, and when I'm wearing them, I don't feel like embarrassed like a lot of the other gaming headsets in the space. So, you know, I feel like it's a good vibe.
it's a classy
nice,
vibe. It's a classy vibe.
Yeah, it's classy. Yeah, it's classy, and it's
keep it classy here. All right. Well, thank you very much, Turtle Beach. Again, supporting our sponsors is the best way to support our shows here at LFN. So head on over to Turtle Beach and looking for a new headset. They also, I mean, Wolf, they've got everything. They have flight sticks. So if you're super into flight simulators or dog fighting, check that out. They've got car racing sims controls. I've never used that, but I know some people are like big fans of those Formula One games. So lots of different opportunities. Let's head into regional finals, because this was do or die time for our teams. 2 teams were making it out. Do we need to talk about BNK FearX at all, or are they just
No? I mean, like, you remember in 2022, we were like, yeah, DRX is like literally going to be nothing. That's how I felt about BNK, except they were nothing, and they didn't win a single game, and that was the end of it. Like
in a meta that we think was probably pretty halfway decent for them.
They just didn't play their style at all. I'm frustrated with the team. I think it's blow it up. We'll see what happens next year. Like I don't know what's going on. Ryu was drafting well, and then he stopped, and then they couldn't play well. Like Clear is a really good player. Like I'll give that to him. Like he's had pretty good, like, you know, upswing during this this year towards the end of this summer season, but I don't know. I mean, Henna's Ziggs was not inspiring, even though he had some pretty good games of Ziggs, even in losses earlier at the end of the regular season and in playoffs, but he just didn't perform. And I don't know. I got kind of depressed thinking about BNK, because remember when BNK had like that 2-3 week stint where they were like, oh, we beat T1, like we could beat anybody. We were playing dive. Yeah, we're like, oh, look at this team. All right. Because before that, it was depressing. Like, not even just like in summer, but before that, like all year, I was like, I'm done thinking this team can do anything. And then they tricked me, Monty. They were like, we can do things.
Like remember I can play Yone? Remember that one?
Yeah.
I mean, it was a great meta for them.
They stopped doing the things that they're good at. They stopped playing dive. They stopped playing single target blow up. They stopped playing RA. They stopped doing all the stuff that made them good. And then they just became irrelevant. I feel like as much as a fairly strong and experienced roster they have, sure, like Henna, for example, is not like the player that has great accolades, and Duro is very experienced and challenger, very, very like strong player coming into this team. Like, even though he hasn't, you know, won anything really, he's got a ton of experience, was considered one of the best supports and challengers for a really long time. They have a good roster. They have a roster that's good at one thing, but they've proven time and time again 2 things: that A, they're not meta resilient at all, and B, they won't play what they're best at, even when it's still relevant in a meta, because they want to play the best meta. Like, they're constantly trying to chase the top teams that they aren't. Like, they're not a top team. They're like, we can just draft and play the top teams. Sorry, you can't. But it was a good try. You tried to play meta. Maybe next time you won't. I think this roster is going to blow up. We'll see what it looks like next year. But I'm not disappointed that like they played badly, and I'm not disappointed that they played as they did, because after we saw them in playoffs, we knew it was probably going to be a dud. The one thing I'm sad about is I feel like maybe Kwangdong could have been more interesting here. Like, they're only 10 points away because of how the qualifiers works, and how World Championship points work. Like, if they had just gotten to playoffs and bombed out of playoffs, it would have been them instead. And maybe they would have made it more interesting, but alas.
Well, that's enough of that. Let's talk about what everybody wants us to talk about, which is clearly the fact that Dplus Kia, I mean, the 2 teams that we thought would go to Worlds, that were the favorites, T1 and Dplus Kia, did do that. Was it in the order that we perhaps expected? No. I mean, T1 comes and beats Dplus Kia pretty convincingly in the LCK playoffs, and then we get this series, which is a travesty, I think is the best way to put it. It was a terrible display of skill from both teams. This was an aiming 1v9, it felt like at times. Shout out to aiming, though. He played fucking amazing. And if you guys want to know why he was my first team All-Pro from summer, this is a great example of what he can do. And you know what, Wolf? You know what? Aiming even popped off on the Ziggs. I didn't even know he was this good at Ziggs. But his satchel charges and the way that he was using them to force people into his team was beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah. He had a great performance. We saw Aguma try to play Sivir into this, which was also replicated yesterday. Yep. It didn't work.
For the wave clear, I mean, it nearly worked. I think the wave clear idea is actually pretty interesting. I don't hate it.
The spell shield is quite impactful against Ziggs as well, but I think Ziggs is he's just so strong right now that if you think you have the answer, you probably don't. You probably don't. Also, like Dplus losing game one, by the way, with like a massive lead and with how Eamon was playing and the damage build he had, and Showmaker being 8-0 on Corki, and they're playing Nocturne, and like they don't even have really set up for the Rumble. Like, how did D Plus pull it off? It's like really impressive that they lost
I
that
mean, their
game.
macro is just so abysmal. I think that's the
Both
funniest
teams'
part.
macro look bad in this series, you know?
But I think what's so funny about Dplus is like they have no idea how to do Baron, or they have no idea how to play poke compositions where they have to like deal damage before they start an objective, or like get vision control so they can poke people as they start to check the Baron. No, they don't do that. They just start the Baron and then lose a team fight. You know, with Showmaker flashing in place, and so he can't escape the Baron conflict after valking over the wall. I mean, it was bad, man. Like Dplus looked like trash. Moham had a terrible series. Terrible. He was so bad.
The Blitzcrank game. The Blitzcrank game.
When he flashed and knocked up a minion in lane and then died.
I don't even remember if they killed the minion or not. Like Moham is a player that, you know, I've been watching, I've been commentating, I've been tracking for a really long time, and obviously he's known for his Rel, but he's known for his Leona as well. And his Nautilus is decent, but he played a lot of Seraphine when he first came onto the scene, right? Like he was kind of an enchanter guy, but he started to pick up these engaged supports. And a lot of people are wondering, is this guy like a Rel one trick? Because he kept getting Rel and popping off on Rel, but when he was on other picks, he looked a little bit less strong. But I feel like this was just perhaps a little bit of nerves from him. Like he just had a really bad series in general. And you're playing against Keria, right? And Keria is a very smart player, and you know often will read you like a book. Especially in a meta where you become like somewhat of a pseudo jungler as the support, basically, because we're doing lane swaps and you're like bailing Faker out, which was honestly in these regional qualifiers, like Keria just became Faker's bodyguard. He's like, "Oh, Faker, you're losing lane again. I'll just ignite the enemy mid laner and walk away." So there's definitely a little bit of that going on. But yeah, I feel like when it comes to these kind of lane swap metas, T1 hasn't been great, but Keria has been very smart about where he goes on the map, and where he makes an impact while the lane is swapped and like he doesn't need to be with Guma. I think Moham was kind of caught off guard by that and felt pressure to make a lot of plays and just kind of dropped the ball. I mean, it was one of the highest death series of a single player that I can remember in a best of 5. Like he died all the time. Even in their wins, he was dying a lot. He was getting caught a lot. He made some big plays though. He did make some big plays, but like I think he was really dragging the team down in some of those games where they should have been much further ahead. They should have been able to push their leads further ahead, and he kind of botched some of the setups. He was super greedy.
Here's the thing. What's the point of Moham? This is just another chapter in if the support player isn't bringing some sort of macro shot call, why are we continuing to switch supports? Like at least with Bible, you know, maybe the macro got a little bit better, even though the laning was atrocious. But now we just get Moham, and he just ints this series. I mean, they win it, surprisingly, thanks to aiming and kinging mostly. But you know, if he's just gonna run it down, and he's not gonna do good shot calling that gets them objectives, what is the point of making the support change again? Like, why can't this just be Kellen?
Well, I don't know if Kellen fares like much better. His engaged supports have just been kind of sussy for a while, and if you think he's not actually gonna be like, if you think he's not actually going to grow because Kellen has a ton of experience, right? Like, he's not like he's way younger than
to be fair to Moham, he did have some good Rel games before this.
Yeah,
like
no, for sure. Like, I just think Kellen is a player that they've tried for so long now, like over 2 years, and you're like, well, does he actually get better, or is this just like his peak? And you say, as an org, you have to start to wonder those things if you're moving into worlds and you're ambitious about worlds. I think it's a bold choice. Like I said it earlier, I think it's a bold, brave, but probably correct decision. You know, when they first started putting Moham in at the end of regular season before playoffs, it's like they clearly had a plan. Like, we're going to try to develop him, and hopefully he'll be ready by Worlds. We have seen that he's not, right. Like that has been seen. They still have Kellen on the roster. Like they could still pull him out, but I just don't know if that's a decision you want to make right now. Like Kellen has looked his best, honestly, when he was playing with Duck Dom. You know, like that's when he's played his best. And in a Renata meta, he looks very good. And in a Lulu Aphelios meta, he looks very good. Like that's what he's good at. He's an enchanter player. His Alistair, he's had some good games on it, but mostly, he's looked like a liability. See Worlds last year. Even Cadril was talking smack about him. I know how much he loves Kellen, but like the reality is like they're doing what we begged them to do with Kana, and I think like it's funny. I find it funny that a lot of Dplus fans were like, "Fire Kana! It's time for Thanatos. We need a change." And then Kellen is absolutely dying and getting smashed and getting crushed, and like he's having a really terrible time. They swapped him all, and everyone's like, "What? I can't believe they'd make a change to one of the positions on our team." I'm like, well, I mean, like you guys wanted this in the top lane. I know support's not a flashy role. I know a lot of people didn't like Kana's play in general. I know Thanatos was this like hot new commodity that everybody wanted to come into the LCK. But like you were mad that they didn't make a swap last time, and now you're mad that they did make a swap this time.
Well, I think that is just because like Moham isn't as hyped as Thanatos, right?
Yeah,
I think that's why.
I mean, probably right, like probably. But I think you have to be willing to make tough changes. I think you have to be willing to do that. I think they should have been willing to try out Lucid and Thanatos last year. They weren't, but now Thanatos is gone. Lucid's in the team, and they're making a tough decision with the support line again.
Don't worry, Thanatos won't be going to Worlds. So did he make the right decision? Who can tell?
Well, I mean, it depends on what his salary is.
Fair enough.
I mean, some players have different priorities. He also probably thought he would like default win by going to NA and going to Worlds, and also we get the salary, and also we get the Worlds bonus money. But look, I don't know what's gonna happen with Dplus next year, but that's like something we'll be talking about in the future because obviously right now they got to go through Worlds. But Moam looked like a liability a lot in this series. I think part of why this series was as close as it was some really poor performances from T1 in general and weaker macro than we saw from them yesterday against KT Rolster. That I really feel like it should have been a more one-sided series. I feel like Dplus should have won game one. Probably should have been a 3-1 this series. But ultimately, there's still some growing to be had for Moham. This series made me feel like, we're going to talk about the KT T1 series, but after watching T1 lose to whatever this was from Dplus, I was like, T1 don't have it. They're not going. Like, I was convinced.
Yeah.
I told everyone, I was like, this is not just like a let's curse KT by getting. I was just like, no, I don't think T1's going to go. I don't think they
looked really bad. They looked really bad.
And they barely did go. Like, they barely did go, but they are going. And I do think T1's ceiling is way higher than KT's. So
obviously,
I think for the LCK, I think it's way better.
Plus, the meta at Worlds should be much better for T1. So absolutely. I think, we're not going to see the performance quite this bad. Now, we'll talk about it when we get to like previewing Worlds, but are they going to fix their coordination issue? That's a big question. Like they're just not looking in sync or good right now.
And Faker is also looking, I don't want to say, I feel like he's looking a little bit better, but I don't want to say that he's back to form like what we saw from him in spring. I still think there's something to be said about Faker doesn't enjoy this meta. He's struggling in this meta. He's losing a lot.
Or he's still injured. Or he looked good in spring because his injury wasn't plaguing him. But after months and months and months and months of playing, going to MSI, going to Esports World Cup, running all the way through summer, maybe his injury is just aggravated again.
Yeah, and I think the excuse me, in that documentary that I think hasn't been released to the public yet, but I wasn't able to see it because when they had private screenings, I was actually traveling. But I have heard from people who've seen it who kind of like leaked some of the plot lines and stuff like that is that his injury came up massively in that documentary. So I'm looking forward to watching that documentary, which I think largely documents their run to winning Worlds last year. And I think when I see that video, I'll really get like a big picture idea of exactly what he was going through, because we've heard a lot of stuff he's talked about in interviews and whatnot. I don't think if he's going through what he was going through last time, based on what we saw and what we've heard, that he would still be playing. But it still might be that like there's a certain level of playing through the pain. There's a certain level of like, I'm good. I'm not perfect, but I'm good. I'm good to play today. Level of struggle that's happening. Um, I want to talk about the series though.
And
The
this is
one
also
draft.
to your point, Wolf. This is probably not an injury that can be detected. It's not like he has a broken bone, right? Like if he says he's good, whether he is or not, it's going to be hard for anybody else to diagnose him and say like, no, you need to hit this one.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we've talked about this a lot on the show, but knowing Faker's personality, like,
Yeah. He's not going to
and
miss it.
and how he would rather be uncomfortable with his wrists and with his body than actually like let the team down. So the one draft in this series against KT that felt very T1 to me, that made me very happy, and that I felt like, okay, this gives me hope that they can figure out how to draft like the rest of this best of 5 in Worlds, was actually the Game 3 draft, where they had Zeus on the Camille, owners playing Sejuani, obviously Faker pulls out the Talia, and it's like this is and you have the Ziggs, right? So like this is the draft where it's old school T1. Faker's roaming. You've got Zeus on a strong champ he can win lane on, and then you have Guma. Yeah, he's not a great Ziggs player. Let's be realistic, but he's in a lane where even with lane swaps he should have control. So Zeus should have agency. Faker can roam, and it creates that sort of lane swap situation creates a lot of power for Talia because she can get faster roams with her ultimate than a Corki can, as long as he's not losing lane, and he laned pretty well into the Corki, which we've seen, be a pretty good matchup when Faker's on the Talia side. When he's on the Corki side, he has struggled into this matchup in the past, but when he's on the Talia side, he looks really good on it. That was one of those drafts I'm like, oh, okay, they're brave enough to play Talia here. That's good. That like as soon as like before it even got hovered, I was like, oh, this is a Talia angle, but they might just play something not great here. Like Baker might do something weird that doesn't make sense. And then they locked it Talia. I'm like, okay, thank God.
And
Like
Talia
they're ready
has
to do
still
it. They
been
know
a fringe meta pick around the world. Not like it's popping up in other regions, on this patch over the course of playoffs. So it is good to see that though. And, with hopefully some kind of at least a nominal shift. I mean, the thing about Worlds is that Yone is still going to be very strong, but if you have other options in terms of some other control mages that he might be able to pull out, or that might be a little bit more viable, like Faker is definitely going to feel, more. Before we talk about the rest of the series, though, Wolf, got another sponsor today. That is our friends over at Mando. If you guys don't know, this is for soaps and deodorants for you, men. And they're not antiperspirants, which I really appreciate because it doesn't have aluminum. It doesn't actually block your sweating. It is instead uses products to make sure that your sweat never starts smelling in the first place, effectively, right? You guys have heard of Lumi, the same company that makes that deodorant. It has mandelic acid in it, which kind of prevents the odor from forming in the first place. They've got a variety of products, guys. They have stick deodorant. They have rub-in cream deodorant. They have like deodorant wipes, which if you're starting to smell, you can just run them over your armpits or wherever you're else. If you're out camping, super useful. Or if you've just been out, starting to smell after a long day, you can just use that, throw on some more deodorant afterwards. It's been really helpful for me. In particular, they have body wash, they have soaps, they've got everything that you could want. And you can try it all because you can get a Mando starter pack for new customers. And that comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, and 2 free products of your choice, like a mini body wash or the deodorant wipes. I do recommend really trying the deodorant wipes. I think you'll find them to be very helpful, and free shipping. And we do have a discount code for you. Obviously, new customers will get a $5 off the starter pack with the exclusive code. That equates to 40% off your starter pack. You can use code Monte Wolf at shopmando.com, shopmando.com. How have you enjoyed it, Wolf?
I mean, it's been great to have the wipes, especially in Korea, where I'm out. Like it's humid,
It's monsoon
and like
season. It's horrible.
it's monsoon season. It's humid. Sometimes it's just like pouring rain. And it's like the nasty, sweaty rain
Like hot
weather.
rain.
Sometimes it's the sun beating on you. Like it feels like you're going into a sauna. So having the wipes has been really nice. And I ride a motorbike. Like, you guys probably know this. I've talked about it before. So like sometimes I'm out sweating in there, and I've actually got the wipes. They really easily accessible. Just pull them out and like get the stink off. And that's been pretty cool. I've never actually used wipes like this before,
No, neither
but
had
it's
I.
been very. So it's super rad. And like you mentioned, the versatility of products that you have as well. So depending on what type of deodorant you like, you can fit the
Oh yeah, they got
situation.
tons of like they've got bourbon leather smell, clover woods. Like they have unscented if that's what you're into as well. If you don't want anything, that's an option. So some really good ones too. I have enjoyed.
Yeah, it's been pretty awesome. It's been pretty impactful to my life in this summer season that we're closely getting to the end of it. It feels like it's just never ending in Korea. Like 2 weeks ago, I'm like, oh, it's fall now. Actually, never mind. It's just
It's
sweaty,
still really
sticky
hot.
weather.
Yeah, I have to say, Wolf, I'm glad to get out of that here in California for a little bit. All right, let's talk about T1 versus KT. So you mentioned game 3 is like feeling kind of like the T1 draft, but if we're going to talk about T1, who did in fact win the series, we do have to discuss some of the insane anti-synergy that this team had, which was really embodied in game 2 with Keria just coming in and using his Bard ult in his own skin from being world champion last year to eliminate all of his other team's ults and then lose a team fight and lose the game, which was hilarious, but not the kind of coordination or teamwork we've come to expect from this T1.
Yeah, so I was analyzing that game, like I was on the analyst desk that time, and I was like, we were like, we're watching the games. We have an observer PC, so we can go back and look at stuff, like check numbers, like how many stacks somebody has, or whatever. Usually the other analyst is the one who's on the computer, and I'm looking at the game and I'm putting in numbers to like get clips and stuff like that. That's kind of like my role to pull the curtain back. So I was kind of like, I was in the middle of sending in a clip I wanted to get when this team fight happened, and I was caught off guard. So I ran back over to the TV because I wasn't looking directly at it in the fight, and I saw that BDD had gone golden with all the ults coming through, and I was like, I actually had this thought, like in this moment,
Did he
like,
buy
holy
arm
shit,
guard?
did he teched arm guard for this fight? Like how? And then I was like, I could totally forgive this fight for T1 because how could they know he'd buy arm guard? Like it's so horrible to buy that on Yone. Like this is not viable. Like it makes no sense. Like why the fuck would BDD buy that? Like I totally can forgive T1. And then what did was like, no, Keria ulted him, bro. I was like, what? And then we watched the fight back, and I was like, oh my god, because I was like, oh, sick value for BDD on the arm guard, like holy
his
shit,
gamble
like,
really paid off.
But then when you see that like everybody is just so not on the same page and Keria ults it, it was rough. And then Keria had the confidence to pick the Bard again in the next game was actually insane because I was like, nah, he's not gonna play it. Like, there's no way.
Dude, I'm surprised his coaches let him do that. He played it much better in the next game, guys, but it was appalling.
Yeah, that draft also just didn't make any sense. Like, you have an Ornn that's gonna make your Ziggs stronger late, and you have Faker who's gonna like infinitely scale. So I guess it has really good late game kind of, but it just doesn't have any way of setting up like the one fight where they had the one angle to actually wombo combo was like denied by Keria, but even still, like you're often in these fights just gonna be burnt to a crisp because you are all melee outside of the Ziggs, like trying to run in and set something up, and then the equalizer zones you completely. And then there's just so much more power in Rel, Skarner, Rumble Equalizer, and like literally perfect just setup for Pioshik to like make barbecue like in every single fight. I felt like that was a really good draft from KT. Very weak and strange draft from T1, and Faker got obliterated in lane. It was like I kept looking at CS numbers, and I'm like, that can't be right. Like how is he down that much? Luckily he was able to stack, but it doesn't matter. Like the game was cooked. That was a game. That was another one of those games where I'm like, okay, like T1 crushed KT in game 1, and we're like, oh, I guess the dream is dead for KT. That was a pathetic game by KT in game 1.
Well,
In game
that
2,
game
like,
was
okay,
that game
what the
was
hell is going on?
all right. To be fair, that first game was basically lost at level 1. So I wasn't reading too much into that. Because
but then Barrel and Def did a lot of stuff that was like pretty unforgivable as well. Maybe they were just already thinking about game 2, but like they were kind of running it down. They were not having a good game.
That's true. But it was scuffed from minute 1, basically.
Yeah, we went from that scuffed game where Def dies for no reason after Perfect gets picked and the game is over to like shenanigans where Deft and Barrel are trying to make stuff happen but getting punished super hard, to T1 throwing the game completely off of a weird ult from Carrier, to then going to like the good draft from T1. That's why I was saying like the game 3 draft from T1, I was like, okay, we're all settled down. We're doing things that make sense now. Like it's actually going to be a real game. It's going to be fun. And the Sivir pick in that game also from Deft was, like I mentioned earlier in the Dplus series, like it didn't really hit for me. Like I think it's a good idea. The wave clear was good, and he was able to keep the Ziggs at bay, deny plates, but then ultimately is still playing Sivir in this meta. So especially without like great synergy because they're playing Ivern. Like Sivir's Ricochet is great with the brushes and stuff because you can bounce through the bushes and do damage and kind of kite back. But it's usually more impactful when you're playing a more aggressive dive style comp where you have a really strong frontline that uses the Sivir ult to get on top of the enemy team so the Sivir can just blow them up long term with like her really great scaling damage. But Ivern isn't really gonna do that for you. So it didn't feel like the comp made a ton of sense. It felt like the Sivir pick was just an anti-Ziggs pick that did its job, but then ultimately failed.
All right, so as I was saying before my video encoder rudely exploded, and then we had to do this several days later, basically the Sivir provides a lot of wave clear in the games that we saw it played in the LCK, and I think that was probably its primary purpose as a Ziggs counter. But do you have any final thoughts on the actual, finale of the T1 KT series, Wolf, before we go into our preview of the LCK teams for Worlds?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like it's somewhat of a crime that BDD is not going to be performing at Worlds just because the man is at times has been basically second best mid laner in the LCK. I think, given Chovy's lack of form in the finals, not that he was bad or anything, but he just wasn't living up to the expectations we had for him. It was a bit of an off series for him, didn't perform to his best. We're sending players like Showmaker instead, who I think is significantly worse than BDD is right now. And Faker, who also is, maybe he'll have a glow up because we've seen it before. We saw it last year. Currently, though, underperforming compared to BDD. So I feel really sad that BDD is not going to be a part of this World Championship. And it's just it leaves a bad taste in my mouth knowing the potential that we lost because of him. And, the other feeling, I have about this series just in general is that neither team looked to be anywhere near the same level as Hanwha and GenG. But I do think that, T1 has the opportunity to be better than Dom1, and I think their ceiling is definitely higher, Dplus, that is to say, but their ceiling is definitely higher.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously, like, this was Deft's last game as well, which is, bittersweet. He's implied that he's going to be, he's basically said he's going to be retiring after this. This KT roster is going to be no more. I think for those of us who are true KT fans, mercifully, I mean, I'm glad I never have to watch this roster play again. The BDD torture device. Perfect is actually the only player who is contracted beyond this year. So he's contracted through the end of 2026. So I'm hopeful that maybe BDD can get a good team around him again, like last year's KT. I mean, maybe he re-signs with KT and they actually get some, better players around him. But it was pretty disappointing to see his incredible performance this year kind of dragged down by his less than stellar teammates.
Yeah. On that note, I mean, we do know that like some of the like salary cap stuff is getting more enforced and I think getting more involved next year. So a lot of the time, I think a lot of people look at the next year like roster swaps and kind of like Stove League and Explosion that's going to happen as well. There's no way KT can afford a better roster. However, I do think considering that a lot of players I think will be pretty fluid this season. A lot of teams will be trying to figure out how they can not break the cap and have to spend extra money. That some players might kind of fall through the cracks, even some top tier players. So I think that if KT is creative enough, even with a relatively small budget, if it's similar to the one we saw in 2023, then I think they could definitely do it. If it's similar to the 2024 budget, like it'll be hard, but I think that BDD might get a team around him. If he doesn't, man, send him somewhere, like upgrade him. I don't know. I don't want him to go to China selfishly, but maybe that's the best thing for him. I don't think he will go, but I just want him to get the best that he deserves because he deserves better than not making Worlds.
Fair enough. All right, guys, we have one more sponsor today. and that is, of course, Factor, as we have told you about many times. If you would like to receive Factor at your home, you can get a sweet deal with us. And what is Factor? Well, they're fresh, never frozen meals that are chef crafted. They are delivered to your home via the mail in a cardboard box that has cold packs in it to keep them nice and cool. And you just get the box, pop it in your fridge, and you, for the next week, will be the proud owner of however many meals it is that you ordered. Now, these are just ready in the microwave in 2 minutes. They're probably going to be a little bit healthier than eating out if you make, questionable decisions when you eat out like I do. You can get Protein Plus, Keto, Calorie Smart versions. A lot of them are like a nice pork chop with some vegetables like green beans and mashed potatoes on the side. So I really enjoyed using it when I was back in the States in May. Helped me out a lot with my streams, making sure I wasn't away from my stream for too long when I was doing analysis for the MSI games. So I really appreciated that. There are 35 different meals every week, and they rotate, so you're never going to get bored. You can also add up to 60 add-ons, including breakfast, dessert, protein shakes, which I had in my box, which are really nice. So you can head to factormeals.com/MonteWolf50 and use code MonteWolf50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code MonteWolf50 at factormeals.com/MonteWolf50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. So great savings to try it out. Now's a great time. And of course, thank you for supporting us, Factor, and for you guys, because supporting our sponsors is the best way you can support us here at the Monte Wolf Show or at Last Free Nation, generally speaking.
Thanks so much.
All right, so let's talk about, Wolf, finally, the preview of all of the teams that are from Korea that are going to this World Championship. Are we still feeling like GenG is going to be the favorite from Korea to win Worlds, even though they lost to Hanwha? That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I think GenG is definitely the stronger team, and they don't have Peanut on the roster anymore. They don't have Doran on the roster anymore. It's a roster that probably won't choke. Like, weirdly enough, I feel like the most likely to choke players on the roster are weirdly Canyon and Pays. And just because Pays has had some weird games, like, it's a 1 out of 50 games for him, but sometimes it matters a lot in a big series, like his real shift forward in the finals and stuff like that. Like, we have seen him make some mistakes. Canyon also looks really poor when his team is behind. So if it's a meta where they're struggling to get big leads like they have all year, I mean, not saying they've struggled all year, but they have not had any struggles all year long, really getting big, massive leads in the early game and playing the macro game well, the lane swaps really well. Canyon has looked very weak when the team doesn't actually have control over the map and his lanes don't have cryo because he's played through that all year. And had struggles with it on Dplus. But I don't think we can assume those things are going to happen. I don't think the GenG is going to internationally choke narrative really applies here for this roster because they don't have those same players that, like Peanut, who have historically had bad international performances. Pays looked very good at MSI, so he's proven that they can have that international performance. Obviously, EWC was a bit of a bump in the road, but as it's come out now, the players didn't listen to the coaches, and that was just. Are
you concerned about that? Because I think the concern with GenG is that sometimes they have a little bit weird meta reads, like we talked about earlier in the show for the finals, and then sometimes they also seem like they're too cocky, like they did at Esports World Cup. And obviously Esports World Cup doesn't have the same level of seriousness as MSI and Worlds have, and certainly they did a very good job at MSI. But we have seen them in situations where they may be a little bit too confident against certain opponents or too confident in their own abilities or their own meta reads, and they seem resistant to kind of change when that goes wrong.
I think because we have the Swiss format, it's actually kind of a benefit to them because they're going to be playing opponents nonstop that are at least at their same win rate. So you have the opportunity to, if you make a mistake, you also don't get knocked out. It doesn't affect you necessarily too much if you can adapt quickly going through Swiss. So it gives me the vibe and the feeling that GenG should be able to, in theory, adapt pretty quickly, especially because there's so many games at Worlds and so many different people are going to have their own reads. Their adaptability has been pretty quick, even if their early reads have sometimes been wrong, and they get to skip play-ins. So it's a pretty wild patch we're going into for Worlds, but the play-in stage will give us a pretty big hint as to what things are going to look like, even though the caliber of teams, obviously, there's a pretty large gap there. Usually, the play-ins teams will kind of follow whatever the big boys are doing in scrims because they're scrimming with them quite a bit.
Sure.
So I think we'll have a good read then. I do think though that even though Hanwha did win on the day in that best of 5 in Gyeongju, I don't think they're the stronger team. I think they're very strong, and it would be awesome to see them actually make a huge run, and topple some of the greats in Worlds, maybe even defeating GenG or T1 along the way. They'd have to do something like that or beat one of our top Chinese teams from the LPL in order to lift a title. But I think if they face against GenG head to head, probably they do go down this time. And I know that sounds a bit like voodoo magic sounding like, oh, Wolf has this weird permission. No, I just don't. I think GenG still is the better team. I think we all knew that GenG didn't play their best of 5 on the finals day. Hanwha had the extra lower bracket warm up run, and were really feeling themselves there and had toppled T1 before. I think there was a lot of momentum behind them.
I mean, I also just want to reiterate how close this was to a 3-0 for GenG in that final, too. Like, the narrative really changes if they don't throw the end of game 1, because games 2 and 3 were incredibly dominant for GenG. And I think, like, their failure to really, like, just grab the Tristana was probably, like, the biggest part of their shortcomings in the draft phase. So, I don't know. It was a little bit weird. I don't think they're going to come in looking like that again. With Hanwha, obviously, we have to be concerned about the Peanut choking at internationals angle that always kind of rears its head in these situations. And with GenG, at least, you have the confidence of this group of veteran players who is now, international champions as well with MSI. They shouldn't be they shouldn't be suffering from those choke angles anymore, one would think.
Yeah. Am I crazy, or is this the first time Zeka goes to Worlds since 2022 as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, only missed one Worlds. Yeah. But, Zeka, back on the Hanwha point, I mean, the fact that Yone is still going to be a major pick, most likely at Worlds, is going to be hugely beneficial for him.
Yeah, so he didn't obviously play in the MSIs either, so it's interesting to see, like, it's his first international. Sure, he only missed one Worlds, but he didn't go to MSI. So what he looks like, what his international form is, what the pressure and expectations on him are, considering it's like the first time he's going to Worlds since he lifted the trophy, and some of the weight that comes with that, should be interesting, because I think that's something that isn't talked about enough for players, especially because a lot of the narrative around him was so negative, even after he won Worlds. Like, Patch Zerg, who were saying, oh, it was just a good meta for him. He's not the best mid laner in the world. Then he won the LCK, Player of the Year at the end during the LCK Awards, which, if you remember,
was ridiculous.
It was quite controversial, right? A lot of the Korean fans were super upset about it as well. So he kind of won Worlds, right? Got a big fat check for 2023, but was kind of, I feel like, shat on by a lot of people afterwards. So maybe he has
fairly
this
shat on. Fairly.
And I think now he's evolved as a player. I think he has, because at the time I think we were right. Like, he was quite lucky on how the meta went, and he looked poor the next year. His quirky games were rough. Like, we were very right to criticize him throughout a lot of 2023 and even early 2024. But he's evolved as a player so much. I wonder where his headspace is, though, going into this tournament, where now he gets to be like, okay, I'm big Zeka now, I'm good Zeka now, I'm legit now, and he gets to prove it. Or maybe he gets too caught up in that concept and doesn't perform as well as he should because of the crowd, because of the pressure, because of the haters, right? Because Zeka is a player internationally, not just, like, domestically as well, who gets a lot of hate, who isn't even in the same conversation of love players like Chovy, Showmaker, Faker, etc. Like, he's not in that conversation even in Korea. I think that's changing slightly. And
I mean,
over
he's
time,
still very young, to be fair.
Yeah.
I mean, he's only 21, and he was 19 when he won Worlds, so he's still a pretty young professional player.
So I think that there's a high degree of, like, do Peanut and Doran choke, as we've seen? Do we see Zeka underperform? And how does that go? Like, Viper obviously has a ton of international experience. Delight has some, so I don't think this roster is going to just flop because it's like, oh no, travel. But it is historically.
I mean, they do have two world champion players on this roster. Like,
exactly.
They're no slouches.
And Viper is going to be fine. Viper is kind of meta proof. He's shown in the past. Sometimes we were a little bit worried about some of the AP picks in the bottom lane that he hasn't played as well on, but he has played, like, the Tulia bottom lane, the Ziggs quite well and stuff like that. So, I mean, he's played Teemo bot and stuff in his career. So I think he's pretty meta-proof. I think he's pretty flexible. I would say that if T1 doesn't really, how do I say this? Like, if they don't actually go back to form, if they don't actually have that glow up that we saw from the mid-Worlds 2023, if they don't actually keep going up and up like T1 has done so many times in the past, then I think that I would put T1 kind of third in terms of where our seeds are. I would still put Hanwha ahead of them, but it's that X factor of T1 growing quickly and sometimes dominating early in a new meta because they have such a good read on it. And if it suits their playstyle, which is looking like it might, then they could be better than Hanwha. But I think we have like a very clear favorite in GenG in terms of what we think the best chance of LCK winning Worlds is. Then it gets a little bit murkier between Hanwha and T1, but I give a slight edge to Hanwha. And then you have Dplus. And I just,
I mean,
I don't know.
the worst match of this tournament will be played between Dplus and Fnatic. You know what I mean? Like the no macro king toilet bowl. It will be terrible to watch.
I mean, aiming has. Well, I feel like he has all the power in this team right now. They do what he says. They feed him money. He has money. He scales. He pops off. Right, like that's the game plan. They haven't proven that they're going to go back to their showmaker pick based comps. They're not going to play the Twisted Fate. They're not going to play the Ari anymore. They're not going to do that stuff. They're not going to put Lucid on Lee Sin. They're just going to play for aiming. That's like that. I don't know who decided that. It sounds like it's aiming based on how I'm seeing him take people's wolves away and stuff. Like aiming is like no. We're playing for me, and everyone says okay. And
I can't say it's a bad strategy. They have no macro, so aiming might as well carry them, right?
I think that's gone somewhat unpunished in the LCK because the LCK hasn't really been able to kind of tunnel on diving him, punishing him as much. But I do wonder if some of the non-Korean teams, like the LPL teams, maybe like G2 or somebody, could come up with a strat to just shut him down super hard. Lane swaps seem like they're not really going to be a thing going into Worlds. We'll see. But they made the changes that make it pretty hard for
I think we can still see it for the first couple levels.
I think certainly there's an opportunity there. We'll see. But again, outside of lane swaps, I'd love to see a team come up with a strategy to punish Dplus, because their playstyle is so obvious. Like, it's so transparent. It's so predictable. And it's working against, I think a lot of the LCK teams that just don't have enough synergy to actually punish that, because sometimes the hands diff between LCK and like Europe, for example, is so huge. Or sometimes the macro diff is so huge that it just doesn't matter. But strategy-wise, the LCK is not always known for coming up with good strategies. Like, half of our LCK teams just copy what the top teams are doing, but do it wrong. And then you get away with just funneling gold into aiming, and then he just carries and pops off because he's better than most of the AD carries in the LCK. I don't know if that necessarily ends up happening at Worlds, so I'm a little bit worried about that. I'm a little bit worried about Showmaker's current form, just because he's been relatively muted as well. Not that he's playing badly, but if I compare peak Showmaker to now, like, we're very much down here, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's fair. And like T1, like, clearly they should do better in the incoming Worlds meta, but I mean, I don't know how much that really makes you feel better when it's their coordination and teamwork where they seem like their timings just seem to be off, which have nothing to do with the meta. So I have to say I'm still a little bit concerned about that angle of it. But maybe a couple weeks with a break will, if Faker's still being plagued by his injury, which I don't know how he couldn't be. You know what I mean? Like, it seems like he has a pretty serious, like, elbow, like he has, nerve damage in his elbow, which probably requires surgery and rest in order to heal. And as long as he's active in his career, I'm not sure how much better it could actually be, right? And they've been pretty hush-hush about the severity of it, what it actually is. There's some interesting information, like, seeping out from this Red Bull documentary that has yet to be released right now, but we'll have to see exactly what that reveals. But it does seem like he was a lot better at the start of the year mechanically, and he's kind of just like fallen off as the year has gone on. And that just makes me think maybe his injury is flaring up again because he's used it a lot after not having a break. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Plus traveling to Saudi Arabia, competing in EWC on top of that schedule, and then going all the way to the finals, winning the whole thing. So I think if we go to a meta where team fights are more important than just dives and getting massive leads and snowballing, then that's where you can get worried for T1. Because if you actually have to fight for every grub, you have to fight for every dragon, or you're basically banking on scaling and then winning a team fight around that soul, around that Baron, which T1 has been way better at in the past. It sounds crazy to say, like, oh, T1's team fighting, that's what I'm concerned about, given like their history of fantastic team fighting. But that is kind of what I'm concerned about right now, is even if you're ahead slightly and you have a good scaling comp, if you botch the Bard ult and you completely whiff everything and you just are poorly set up for the fight, then it doesn't matter like what leads you had. They get Elder, they get the Baron, they get the map control, and then your game is done. So I do think there's an element of T1's macro being significantly better than like American and European teams. Like the LCS and LEC teams will, I think, still get completely bopped by T1 at the moment.
Sure.
The question becomes when you hit LCK teams, which you will in this format, and when you hit LPL teams. So that's where my concern is. I don't think T1 is gonna lose to G2 necessarily. I mean, they might, but I can't.
Hey, man, I'm looking for. I mean, we could see a T1 versus Team Liquid matchup in round 1 based on the seeding. So maybe TL actually wins this one.
TL is not fair. TL is not really an LCS team. Like they're smarter than LCS teams. They're better. They have a better coaching staff. No, TL is actually legit. I mean, EWC may be a believer that this roster can actually do good things. Even if there are some incidents along the way to Worlds, I do think TL is a very, very strong team, and yeah, that is one that could be scary, especially because they have such good strategic reads on the meta and punishing ones at that, like counter picks in the mid lane.
The macro is just really good.
Yeah, so I do think that's the one team I will give an exception to, but I think that if we go into another Worlds where Korea dominates the LPL, and because obviously, like, to say they dominated MSI is not entirely true. To say that they dominated Worlds is somewhat true, just given that T1 kind of cut the heads off early and then they smashed the finals against a team that arguably wasn't even necessarily the best team to go to the finals, just based on the format and the bracket. I do wonder what the narrative will look like, though, if we have like a Korea versus Korea finals for the first time in a really long time. I think that would really set the stage for more.
Well, I mean, since 2022, since T1 versus DRX, right?
Yeah. That's true. That one still is like that's not a real Worlds.
I know it's not real Worlds final. We always forget about that one because it's
real
fake.
World. That one is fake. That one's not real. That one's just like script writers controlled everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, it does feel like, though, that in my mind, like, that's erased from my brain because that was just like a fan fiction. That wasn't real.
I mean, Wolf, we were there in San Francisco, and afterwards we're like, I don't believe that this actually happened.
Yeah, no, okay, so I will give the caveat that yes, that did happen. Although it did feel like that was, like I said, a fan fiction and not really a Worlds final. But I do wonder if the fan narrative just becomes the LCK is the best and the most dominant again, like it was back in the old days where we had so many Korea versus Korea finals and extremely dominant performances, and back to the old winning LCK is way harder than winning Worlds. I mean, some people would still say that, but it felt like for a while we dropped off. Like the LCK dropped off in a big way. We were not having that same dominance. We were not winning Worlds, and then we started ramping back up again. Like when Damwon lost in 2021, then people were like, oh, it did become a bit concerning. And then obviously the years before that, where we were just not having Korean teams in the finals, for example, like 2019, there was definitely a very different vibe. And I feel like the LCK fans haven't fully recovered. Like, I feel like the narrative hasn't been back to like, yes, the LCK is the best, like it was in the early 2010s, 2013, 14, 15, like where everybody knew it wasn't even a conversation that Korea was the best. Maybe this is the year where if we have GenG and Hanwha and then T1 even absolutely dominate, despite like from the LCK microcosm, we're like, ooh, T1's looking rough, like, and Damwon dominates, and we're like, oh yeah, Damwon, this team has no idea what they're doing, but then they crush. And I think this might be the year where everyone's like, okay, like, we're all super critical of the LCK teams because we watch them every week and they're not playing at their best and they're still performing internationally. Then I think this could be the year where we're like, holy shit, the LCK could just kind of be mediocre in our minds and then absolutely dumbster. I don't think that's going to happen, but if it does happen, if it does happen though, like I feel like people have to admit that, right? Like,
I love it. I'm on board. I'm on board with this narrative, Wolf. I'm on board. So anyway, guys, hope you guys have enjoyed this season of the Monte and Wolf Show. This will be the last episode, although I'm sure that Wolf will like come on and be a guest on some of our other shows during the run of the World Championship. So we'll get to hear your thoughts. Congrats on a good season with the LCK, man, and we will catch you later.